Long before psychology existed as a science, human beings were already telling stories about the soul. These stories took the form of myths, legends, and fairy tales. Passed from generation to generation, they carried images that seemed simple on the surface. Kings, forests, witches, princes, enchanted castles. But beneath these images lived something deeper. Patterns of human experience that appear again and again across cultures and centuries. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung believed that these stories were not random creations of imagination. He proposed that they emerge from the deepest layers of the human psyche, a shared psychological ground he called the collective unconscious. According to Jung, fairy tales express universal inner experiences: fear, transformation, loss, love, and the long journey toward psychological maturity. Later, one of his closest collaborators, Marie-Louise von Franz, dedicated much of her life to studying fairy tales through this lens. She discovered that these ancient narratives often describe the hidden movements of the human soul with remarkable precision. In their symbolic language, monsters can represent rejected instincts, forests can symbolize the unknown regions of the mind, and encounters with mysterious figures can reflect inner psychological transformations. In this perspective, fairy tales are not primarily stories for children. They are symbolic maps of the inner life. When we listen to them carefully, they begin to reveal something unexpected. They are not only telling a story about distant characters in enchanted lands, they are describing movements that happen within every human being. In the story of Beauty and the Beast, we encounter one of the most powerful images of this inner journey, the meeting between human consciousness and the instinctive forces that live beneath it. And the question the tale quietly asks is not about a monster in a castle. It is about something much closer to home. What happens when the soul finally turns toward the part of itself it has always feared? At the edge of the story stands a castle, silent, distant, almost forgotten. In Beauty and the Beast, this castle does not feel like the enchanted palaces of other fairy tales. It feels abandoned by the world, a place people avoid, a place surrounded not only by forests, but by a quiet, unspoken fear. No one wants to enter. As children, we imagine the reason is simple. A monster lives there. But fairy tales are rarely about the outer world. They are maps of the inner one. And this castle may not be somewhere in the forest. It may be somewhere inside the human psyche. Think about the parts of yourself you rarely visit, the emotions that feel too intense, the impulses that seem too raw, the anger that appears suddenly, the desires that do not fit the image of the person you believe you should be. Modern life teaches us to polish the surface of the personality, to be composed, reasonable, controlled, civilized. But beneath that polished surface, another layer of the psyche exists, older, instinctive, powerful. In the language of analytical psychology, this hidden layer was explored deeply by Carl Jung, who observed that what we reject in ourselves does not disappear. It simply moves into the shadows of the mind. And there, in that psychological distance, it begins to feel foreign, even monstrous. This is why the castle feels so unsettling in the story. It represents a region of the soul we rarely visit willingly, a place where the instincts live without the supervision of the civilized ego. The beast inhabits that territory, not merely as a villain, but as the embodiment of something powerful that has been exiled from conscious life. Strength, passion, rage, desire, vitality, all the energies that society often asks us to restrain. The fairy tale does not begin with Beauty meeting the Beast. It begins with the existence of the castle, a psychological territory avoided by everyone, a place that must eventually be entered. Because the deeper question of the story is not whether the beast is dangerous. The deeper question is this: what happens to the human soul when it refuses to enter its own forbidden castle? When most people remember Beauty and the Beast, they remember the lesson they were taught as children. Do not judge by appearances. True beauty is found within. Kindness can transform even the cruel. These are comforting interpretations. Simple, moral, safe. But fairy tales have survived for centuries, not because they teach polite lessons to children. They endure because they contain symbolic truths about the human psyche, truths that often reveal themselves only in adulthood. When we return to this story with mature eyes, something begins to feel different. The tale suddenly becomes more mysterious and more unsettling. Why does the story begin with a father who loses his fortune and wanders into a strange forest? Why must beauty leave her home and live in isolation with a terrifying creature? And why does the beast, despite his monstrous form, never actually behave like a true villain? These details suggest that the story is not primarily about romance, nor is it about moral virtue. It is about confrontation, a confrontation with something unknown within the human psyche. The figure of the beast represents a dimension of human nature that civilized consciousness struggles to accept. It is instinctive, powerful, emotional, and unpredictable. Everything modern culture trains us to control or suppress. For centuries, Western civilization has celebrated the triumph of reason, discipline, and self-control. These qualities built cities, institutions, and systems of order, but they also created a psychological imbalance. Because the instinctive side of human nature did not disappear, it was simply pushed out of awareness. This is the tension that fascinated the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung. He observed that whenever parts of the psyche are rejected or denied, they do not vanish. Instead, they gather in what he called the shadow, the hidden side of personality containing everything the ego refuses to recognize: anger, sexual desire, aggression, raw vitality. The more intensely these forces are suppressed, the more frightening they appear when they finally emerge. Suddenly, they feel alien, unfamiliar, almost monstrous. And this is precisely how the beast appears in the story. But there is something even more intriguing. Unlike the villains of many fairy tales, the beast does not hunt, destroy, or deceive. He lives alone, isolated in his castle, trapped in a form he did not choose. His presence carries more sadness than malice. This detail changes everything, because it suggests that the beast is not evil. He is exiled. Exiled from the human world, exiled from relationship, exiled from recognition. The fairy tale we were told as children presents beauty as the heroine who learns to see past appearances. But psychologically, the deeper question may be this: what part of human nature has been so rejected that it now appears to us as a monster? And what might happen if, instead of fleeing from that frightening figure, the soul dared to look at it more closely? Because the story quietly suggests something radical. The beast does not disappear when he is rejected. He waits, hidden behind the gates of the inner castle, waiting for someone brave enough to see him differently. At first glance, the beast appears to be the monster of the story. His form is frightening, his voice is rough, his presence fills the castle with tension. Everything about him seems to confirm the obvious interpretation. He represents danger. But fairy tales rarely place the true meaning on the surface. If we look more carefully, something strange emerges. The beast is not roaming the forest attacking travelers. He is not invading villages. He is not seeking power or revenge. He is alone, isolated in a castle that feels more like a prison than a kingdom. This detail changes the psychological meaning of the character entirely. The beast begins to look less like a villain and more like something that has been pushed out of human life, something that once belonged, but no longer has a place. In psychological language, the beast can be understood as the exiled instinct. Modern civilization depends heavily on control. From early childhood, we are taught to regulate impulses, moderate emotions, and behave according to social expectations. These skills are necessary for living in communities. But the human psyche was not built by civilization alone, Beneath the layer of culture lives something much older, a deep instinctive foundation that carries vitality, passion, sexuality, aggression, and the raw energy of survival. These forces are not inherently destructive. In fact, they are essential for life itself. They give us courage, desire, creativity, and the capacity to act. Yet when these instincts are rejected rather than integrated, they do not disappear. They become foreign. This dynamic was central to the work of the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung. He observed that what the conscious personality refuses to acknowledge becomes part of the unconscious. Over time, these rejected energies gather into figures that appear in dreams, myths, and stories. Often, they appear as animals or monsters, because the mind tends to imagine what it does not understand in exaggerated forms. In Beauty and the Beast, the instinctive nature of the beast is unmistakable. His body combines elements of multiple animals. His strength is immense. His emotions are intense and sometimes difficult for him to control. But there is something equally important. He is capable of restraint. He never forces Beauty to love him. He never imprisons her against her will. Each night he asks the same quiet question, "Will you marry me?" And each night he accepts her refusal. This detail reveals something profound. The beast is not pure chaos. He is instinct waiting to be recognized, waiting to be seen not as an enemy, but as a part of human nature that has been misunderstood. When instinct is rejected, it becomes frightening. When it is integrated, it becomes strength. This is why the beast remains trapped in his form, not because he is inherently monstrous, but because no one has yet learned how to meet him without fear. Beauty's decision to enter the castle is one of the most mysterious moments in the entire tale. It is easy to see it as an act of sacrifice. She goes to the beast to save her father. She accepts a fate that no one else would willingly choose. But psychologically, something deeper is happening. Because in fairy tales, the heroine rarely moves randomly through the story. Her movements follow a symbolic path, one that reflects the movement of the human soul toward greater awareness. Beauty does not simply encounter the beast. She chooses to enter his world, and that choice marks the beginning of transformation. In many ways, Beauty represents the aspect of the psyche capable of reflection, empathy, and conscious relationship. She is not naive in the way fairy tale heroines are often portrayed. Instead, she possesses something more subtle, the ability to remain psychologically present in the face of the unknown. When she first arrives at the castle, everything about it feels unsettling. The halls are vast and silent. Invisible servants move through the rooms. The beast himself appears suddenly, overwhelming in size and presence. Every instinct would suggest escape, yet Beauty stays. This is not weakness. It is a form of psychological courage. Because entering the castle symbolizes something that every mature psyche must eventually do, approaching the parts of itself that feel foreign, instinctive, and frightening. Many people spend their lives avoiding this inner territory. They remain on the surface of their personalities, building identities that are socially acceptable but psychologically incomplete. But growth requires something else. It requires the willingness to encounter what lies beneath the surface. The meeting between Beauty and the beast also carries another symbolic layer that fascinated the work of Carl Jung and later interpretations by Marie-Louise von Franz. Within the psychological development of a woman, encounters with masculine figures in dreams and myths often represent the animus, the inner masculine dimension of the psyche. The animus is not simply about gender. It represents qualities such as strength, decisiveness, intellect, and spiritual direction. When undeveloped or repressed, this inner masculine energy can appear harsh, chaotic, or even monstrous. In other words, it may first appear as a beast. Beauty's presence in the castle symbolizes the beginning of a relationship with this inner force. She does not attempt to destroy it. She does not try to escape it. Instead, she begins to observe it, question it, and gradually understand it. And something remarkable begins to happen. The beast, who at first seemed terrifying, slowly reveals another side of himself. Beneath the animal form is loneliness. Beneath the rough voice is vulnerability. Beneath the frightening appearance is a being capable of tenderness. But this revelation could never occur from a distance. Beauty must remain in the castle long enough for the truth to emerge, which suggests something profound about psychological transformation. The parts of ourselves that appear most frightening from afar often contain the very energies necessary for growth, but they reveal their deeper nature only to those who are willing to stay long enough to truly see them. Something subtle begins to happen in the castle after Beauty arrives. At first, nothing seems different. The beast still appears frightening. His voice still carries the rough edge of instinct. Each evening he appears at dinner and asks the same simple question, "Beauty, will you marry me?" And each evening she answers, "No, beast." Yet the story does not move toward violence or punishment. The beast does not react with anger. He does not force her. He simply accepts the answer and withdraws. This quiet repetition is psychologically important because transformation in fairy tales rarely begins with dramatic change. It begins with relationship. Day after day, Beauty and the Beast share the same space. They speak, they observe each other. Slowly, something unfamiliar emerges between them: recognition. Beauty begins to see that the creature she feared is not driven by cruelty. Beneath his terrifying exterior lives a strange mixture of awkwardness, sadness, and sincerity. And the beast, in turn, begins to change in ways that are almost invisible at first. His rage softens. His voice grows gentler. His presence becomes less threatening. The transformation does not occur through magic spells or heroic battles. It unfolds through something much quieter: being seen. This detail carries enormous psychological significance. According to the insights of Carl Jung, the parts of the psyche that remain unconscious often behave in exaggerated and distorted ways. When instinctive energies are denied recognition, they gather in the shadows of the mind where they become unpredictable, overwhelming, or frightening. But when consciousness begins to turn toward these hidden forces, not with rejection, but with attention, they start to change. The beast's transformation begins not because Beauty conquers him, but because she remains present in his presence. She does not idealize him. She does not romanticize him. She simply allows him to exist within her field of awareness, and that alone begins to dissolve the monstrous form. This is the archetypal mirror moment of the story, the point where the fairy tale begins to reflect something about the viewer's own psychological life. Many people believe transformation requires eliminating their darker impulses. They attempt to silence anger, suppress desire, deny instinct, and maintain control over every emotional current within themselves. But the story suggests a different path. What if the instinctive forces we fear are not enemies to be destroyed? What if they are energies waiting to be acknowledged? The beast begins to change, not because he stops being powerful, but because his power is finally held within a relationship. Recognition replaces exile. And in that moment, something long trapped inside the castle begins to move toward humanity. In the final movement of the story, something unexpected happens. Beauty leaves the castle. For a moment, the connection between her and the beast is broken. She returns to the familiar world of family, comfort, and ordinary life. But something inside her has already changed. The castle she once feared now occupies her thoughts. And far away, in the silent halls of that strange place, the beast begins to fade. When Beauty finally returns, she finds him lying in the garden, weak and close to death. The powerful creature who once filled the castle with his presence now appears fragile, almost lifeless. Only then does Beauty realize something she had not fully understood before. She cannot imagine the world without him. In that moment, the words that once felt impossible finally emerge. She loves him, and the transformation occurs. The monstrous figure dissolves, and in his place stands a human being. the prince who had long been hidden beneath the animal form. On the surface, this looks like the happy ending of a romantic fairy tale. Love breaks the curse, the monster becomes a prince, and harmony is restored. But psychologically, the meaning is far deeper. The beast was never meant to remain a beast forever. His frightening appearance symbolized something that had been rejected, misunderstood, and left outside the boundaries of conscious life. Only through relationship could that exiled force return to its human form. This insight reflects one of the most central ideas in the psychology of Carl Jung. Transformation does not happen by destroying parts of the psyche, it happens by integrating them. The instinctive energies represented by the beast, passion, strength, aggression, desire, are not enemies of the soul. When they remain unconscious, they appear monstrous. But when they are brought into relationship with awareness, they can become sources of vitality and psychological wholeness. Beauty's love symbolizes that moment of integration. She does not tame the beast through control. She does not civilize him through discipline. She recognizes his humanity. And through that recognition, the instinctive dimension of the psyche becomes something new, a conscious partner in the life of the soul. This is the deeper secret hidden inside the fairy tale. The path to psychological maturity is not the elimination of our wild nature. It is the meeting between consciousness and instinct. When those two forces finally recognize each other, the monster disappears, not because it was destroyed, but because it was understood. And perhaps that is the quiet question the story leaves behind. Somewhere inside every human life, there is a castle, and within it, a creature waiting to be seen. The question is whether we will continue to fear it, or whether, one day, we might learn how to recognize the hidden prince beneath the beast. If the beast represents the instinctive forces we have pushed away, then where does that beast live in your own life? Is it in the anger you try not to feel? In the desires you learned to hide? In the strength you were taught to suppress in order to appear civilized, reasonable, or acceptable? The fairy tale suggests something unsettling. The more we exile these parts of ourselves, the more monstrous they appear from a distance. But when consciousness finally dares to approach them, like beauty entering the castle, something begins to change. So the real question of this story may not be about the beast at all. It may be about whether we are willing to enter that inner castle and stay long enough to discover what is truly waiting there. If this reflection spoke to something in you, consider subscribing to the channel. Here we explore the hidden psychological wisdom inside fairy tales, myths, and symbols, drawing inspiration from the work of thinkers like Carl Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz to better understand the inner journeys we all face. And if you'd like to continue the conversation, share your thoughts in the comments. Which part of this story felt most familiar to your own life? Thank you for being here and for taking this journey into the deeper layers of the human soul. Until the next video.